Mr. Peter Langenus, who served in both Vietnam and Desert Storm, where he achieved the rank of colonel. The date is November 12th, 2013, location New Canaan, Connecticut. The interviewers are Emma Patch and Riley O'Neill. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress.
So, Mr. Langenus, where is your hometown? Where are you from?
I was born in New York City, but New Canaan is my hometown now.
And do you have any siblings?
I have 4 siblings.
And did any of them serve?
I have a brother who served in the Navy and a brother who served in the Marine Corps.
What motivated you to serve?
I think it's something that every good citizen should do. If I were running the country, I would have what I will call a national service program. When you graduated from high school, you would either go off to the military, to the Peace Corps, to AmeriCorps, or something like that, but you would do 2 years of service to the country before you continued your college education or started your college education.
What advice do you have, if any, to any students considering ROTC in college?
I would say that the Army, or whatever branch of service that you go into, is better than ROTC. I did ROTC. I had really no great interest in ROTC. Mm-hmm. For most people, ROTC brings your grade point average up. It brought mine down. But when I finally got into the Army, I actually fell in love with the Army.
Were your parents in support of you enlisting?
Yes, I would say so. My mother was one of 10 children, and during World War II, 6 of them were in uniform, and of the 6, 2 were female. So yes, of course, I think that they were until the time is when you go off to war, then they have second doubts.
How old were you when you were in Vietnam?
I got there when I was 24, and I came home when I was 25.
What was that like for you?
I'll address, we'll say, the age issue first. In every military unit, the unit commander is known, we'll say, as the old man. And today in the military, sometimes the old man is known as the old lady. But the unit commander is known as the old man or the old lady. And at the age of 24, as the unit commander, there was only one person in the company older than myself. And that was my first sergeant, who was 37 years of age. Everybody else was 18, 19 years of age. Not that far out of high school for many of them.
Yeah.
What was the first thing that you saw during your service that you would say really changed you?
How people came together. I was originally going to do my 2 years of duty in the Army and then, get out. But strangely enough, I fell in love with the Army in Vietnam because it is an organization in which people come together and there is only one agenda, and that is accomplishing the mission and keeping yourself alive while you're doing it.
What do you recall most vividly? Or what kind of action did you witness?
A strange thing to say. Combat is so real. Imagine, we'll say, living with the knowledge that you could die at any moment, and living with the knowledge that somebody wants to kill you at every moment. So you have to keep yourself on a state of alert, a state of vigilance, and if you're the unit commander, you have to make sure that you keep your troops on the same level of alertness. The interesting thing is, the most important human need is not what some people might think it is. The most important human need is the desire for comfort. And comfort is what can get you killed if you relax. So the job of the unit commander is to make sure that your people don't relax and don't let their guard down.
Did you find that your experiences in Vietnam prepared you for what you went through in Desert Storm?
Yes, in two levels. My experience, we'll say, in Vietnam, what I did in Vietnam and what I did in Desert Storm were two very different things. In Vietnam, I was an infantry company commander, and for those people who don't know what the infantry is, that's the foot soldiers, the gunslingers. And we went out on operations in the jungle for 30 to 35 days at a time. And in that 30 to 35 days, we didn't shave, we didn't bathe, we didn't change clothing, we didn't change socks. And if it was in the monsoon, you got muddy and wet for 30 to 35 days at a time. Fast forward, we'll say, to Desert Storm. In Desert Storm, what I did was different. I was commanded a transportation unit in Desert Storm. And we were the theater transportation managers, meaning that we controlled the movement of every truck, train, plane, and ship once it came into the theater of operations. And in Desert Storm, funny thing to say, I almost worked myself to death, because I probably, on a routine basis in Desert Storm, worked 20 to 21 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I did that for 7 months before we were finally able to take it off. But I went for over 8.5 months without taking a day or a half day off in Desert Storm. But what I learned in Vietnam, I was able to teach my soldiers in Desert Storm, and to teach them what they need to know and what they needed to do to stay awake and to stay alive.
What did you do in between Vietnam and Desert Storm?
Okay. When I came back from Vietnam, I went back to school. I had started law school before going into the Army. And I have to say, as a point of honor, that never once for 1 micron of a second was I ever a lawyer in the Army. When I came back from Vietnam, I was also very sick. I had malaria, I had hepatitis, and I went back to law school. It was obviously an adjustment. You go from an environment in which everybody is working together. Everybody has the same goal. And then you come back and everybody is in a million different directions. And none of them are thinking about the soldiers in Vietnam. Very different from Desert Storm, in which the American people were thinking about the soldiers and were rooting for them, were backing them. But I came back from Vietnam, went to law school, and then when I got some health back, I actually started to work, and I've been practicing law in New York City since then.
What would you say your fondest memory is of serving?
The people I served with. People from all walks of life. All over the country, all different education levels, but you came together to do what you had to do. So my best memory is always the people.
And what lessons do you think being in the military taught you?
It taught me what's really important about life. A number of years ago, I had the honor of speaking at the Memorial Day service in Lakeview Cemetery. And what I tried to do in that is I tried to tell people what I learned about life from Vietnam. And the first thing I learned is, and I follow this every day is a good day when they're not shooting at you. Doesn't matter whether it's raining, snowing, hot, cold, it's a good day if they're not shooting at you. The second thing I think I learned is the complete irrelevance of economic background, of ethnic background, of religious background. It doesn't matter. What really matters about people is their integrity. Can you depend upon them? Will they do the right thing when it needs to be done? There are some people who pursue their own self-interest, and then there are others who join the group and serve in the common interest. I think that I learned what's really important about life: family, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, children, a hot shower, clean clothing, a roof over your head. Those are pretty good things.
So, could you tell us about the stereotypes American citizens had surrounding soldiers during the Vietnam War?
The way the American soldier was treated during the Vietnam War was shameful, absolutely shameful. There were lots of people who were against the war, some of them of good conscience. A lot of them, however, were just afraid that they would be called to serve, because we had a draft then. And what a lot of the anti-wars did is they tried to dehumanize the soldiers and say that the Vietnam War was fought by losers, by the lowest end of society, by the lowest end of the economic ladder. In my company, 25% of the soldiers were college graduates. They were all high school graduates. Nobody went into the Army to get out of going to jail. People either volunteered or were drafted. I would say about 2/3 of the people in my company were volunteers. They enlisted. And getting back to how people were treated, as I said, a lot of the antis tried to denigrate who served in Vietnam. And yesterday at SACS, I spoke to, I think, the 7th graders, and I gave them a slideshow of what it was like to go on a combat operation in Vietnam. And I began the story by showing a slide of pictures of my platoon leaders. And contrary to, we'll say, what some of the antis would have had you believe, in that picture, 1st platoon leader, graduate, University of Wisconsin. 2nd platoon leader, graduate of Penn State University. 3rd platoon leader, graduate of Colgate. My artillery forward observer was a graduate of the University of Colorado. And as I say, I graduated from the University of Notre Dame. All of my people were smart people. When they came back, they also achieved. 1st platoon leader retired as the CEO of a specialty steel company. 2nd platoon leader is still working and is the head of one of the best human relations companies in America. 3rd platoon leader passed away several years ago, but he was the chief technology officer of a .com out on the West Coast, and I've been practicing law in New York City for the last 35 plus years. So the idea of denigrating who fought the war by denigrating their service, their background, their intelligence was completely false. We couldn't believe, in my headquarters in Desert Storm, a quarter of them were Vietnam veterans. And as far as an age spread, the youngest person in my headquarters was a 17-year-old female, and the oldest was a 59-year-old male. A quarter of my headquarters were Vietnam veterans. And we couldn't believe the news stories that we heard about America's reaction to the soldiers serving in Desert Storm. It just made no sense to us. It was so completely different. We couldn't believe it, having been through the Vietnam era and how soldiers were treated then. It wasn't good.
How do you feel people's perceptions nowadays have changed, knowing that you're a vet?
Totally different. The way soldiers are treated today is completely different. And when I say soldiers, I mean sailors, I mean Marines, people in the Coast Guard, people in the Air Force. Totally different. People are very appreciative, very demonstrative in expressing their approval of what you did, and for the folks who are serving today, of what they're doing.
You mentioned that you revisited Vietnam 3 times. Why?
First of all, Vietnam is an extraordinarily beautiful country, and you could visit Vietnam just for the beauty of the country. I always liked and I loved the people. I thought that they were very brave, resilient people. And I wanted to go back to see where I operated. Vietnam is, unfortunately, it's a very different place now than when we were there. It is a communist country. The people are very unhappy under, we'll call it, the yoke of communism. They don't have the freedom that we do here. Imagine having to get government approval to go to school. Imagine having to get government approval to go to college or to move more than 25 miles away from where you are now. What the Vietnamese people lost, they understand now. But in any event, getting back, why did I go back? I wanted to go back to see where I operated, and I also wanted to go back to some of the places where I lost friends, to say prayers for them.
And what did you see there?
Where I operated was on the border of what we call 2 and 3 Corps. It was about 125 miles outside, or we'll say north and northeast of Saigon, from the South China Sea to Cambodia. Much of where I operated hasn't changed at all, because much of where I operated was in the jungle. And when we talk about urban sprawl in the United States, we think of the cities growing into the suburbs. But in Vietnam, urban sprawl means that there are houses, we'll say, 500 feet off the highway, going on mile after mile after mile after mile. And there are more houses now, or homes, further out along Route 1 than clearly there were when I was there. Some of what I saw had changed, some of it had not. I had a friend who served in Vietnam. I did not know him then, but he became a friend afterwards. He was an engineer in Vietnam. He built things. And he told me not to go back. He had, years later, he was working for the Ford Motor Company, and his job was to teach people how to open Ford dealerships. And Ford was opening up a dealership in Saigon. So he went back, and he wanted to go back 3 days early to see what he had built, what it looked like today. So he went to the hotel, and he told the hotel concierge, tomorrow morning I would like a car and an English-speaking mature driver. Code word, he was looking for somebody who had served in the South Vietnamese military, somebody who spoke English, somebody who would understand what he was looking for. So the first day he went there, he went to the area where he had built this enormous bridge. It was a wooden bridge, but it was strong enough to carry tanks across. He couldn't find a splinter, a toothpick of the bridge. Spent the whole day looking for it. The next day he went back to a village, and he knew that he had built a concrete bunker system, 8 feet thick concrete steel reinforced walls for an operations headquarters. And it was near a small church in the middle of this small village. So they head outside of Saigon. He finds the church, but he can't find the bunker complex. 8 feet thick steel reinforced concrete. Can't find it. And they go in larger and larger circles around the church looking for this building. Couldn't find it. And then finally, the driver, who for the first time really spoke to him, said, "Dai Huy," Vietnamese for captain. "Dai Huy, come with me." We get in car, we go back to the hotel. And as we're driving back towards Saigon, he said to him, the driver had spent 8 years in a re-education camp, and that all traces of the American presence in Vietnam had been removed by the North Vietnamese. All traces. Well, I didn't follow his advice. I went back to Vietnam anyway because I wanted to see where I operated and I wanted to say prayers for people. We drove outside of Saigon up Route 1. The driver had never been more than 25 miles outside of Saigon. He didn't have permission. We kept on going up Route 1. He said, "How far?" I said, "Keep going until you see a mountain." And this was all flat. He says, "There are no mountains out here." I said, "Keep driving, keep driving." So about 125 miles outside of Saigon appears this mountain in the middle of nowhere. Well, you can take down a bridge, you can take down a steel bunker, but you can't take down a mountain. So I knew it would still be there. It was the site of my first fire base in Vietnam. I couldn't find the fire base, but I found where it had been because I remembered the view looking up at the top of the mountain, the angle where it was. Couldn't find it. So I said to the driver, let's find somebody who is, we'll say, in their 40s, who would have been alive during the war, who might know if there was a fire base or any kind of a base there. So we stopped and found a couple with some young children. The driver spoke to them in English. They didn't know about any base. So I said to the driver, ask them where they were born and how long they have lived here. And in places like Vietnam, you pretty much you live where you were born because family is so important and the family of all generations stays together. Well, the couple answered they didn't know where any base had been. They were 40s. They were born in the Central Highlands, which was about 200 miles away from where we were. I then said to him, okay, let's find an elderly Vietnamese person. We finally found an elderly woman, 70s, 80s, went through the same line of questions. She knew nothing about an army base. We asked same questions. Ask her how old she is, where she was born, and how long she has lived here. She was 70 years of age. She was born in Hanoi, which I would say was probably 1,000 miles north of where we were. Okay, so what does this tell us? They have taken the population and like a deck of cards, they shuffled the population. In a communist society, you can't trust the person living next to you because that person might turn you in. And if your neighbor is somebody who hasn't lived next to you all of your life, but is somebody from the Central Highlands or somebody from Hanoi, you're going to think 3 times about what you say to them. You're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to keep your opinions to yourself. Well, I also, the first time I went back to Vietnam, I took my son back, who was a graduate of New Canaan High School. I wanted to see where I operated so he would better understand who I am and what I'm all about. Of course, we couldn't find the fire base. Second day we went out, and once again, completely against the government regulations, but I tipped the driver very well. And I tipped the concierge at the hotel very well, so he didn't ask where we were going either. Second day we went out looking for my last fire base, was right outside an airstrip. And it was a blacktop, a macadam airstrip. And I figured that they couldn't move that. They couldn't take that up and put it someplace. So I finally found it, and we drove 1.5 miles off the highway to find this place, and it was like an apparition seeing this in the middle of nowhere. And it was like returning to home, seeing this thing after 35 years. And I came across what I would call an overwhelming feeling about age. Not how old I was then, but how young I was then. And at the age of 24, at the age of 25, being responsible, life and death responsibility for 200 people. At such a young age. And at such a young age, having an experience, having responsibility that you'll never have. Whether you were the CEO of a major corporation, you would never have the life and death responsibility for 200 people. Just an amazing thing. Okay, back to the third day I go out. I wanted to go out to see some places where some friends had been killed. Once again, the driver had never been there. I told him how far to go out. I told him to go at a certain road, take a left, and I remember all of these places like they were laser etched into me. Still remember them. Told him when to turn off Route 1, how far to go. I said, go, and I want to stop when we come to a railroad. He says, there's no railroads on the map. I said, there's a railroad there. We go up 15, 20 miles up the road, and lo and behold, there are the railroad tracks. And there's a guard shack by the railroad tracks. And the guard is in the guard shack, stretched out in a hammock, fast asleep. We wake the guard up, and we ask him when the next train comes through. He says, oh, no trains come through here, no trains. Well, the night before I had gone to the train station in Saigon, and I figured out when the trains would be coming through that day. My son walks up the right-of-way, and here he is, what I will call a New Canaan kid. He's got his flip-flops on, he's got his shorts on, he's got a t-shirt on, his sunglasses on the top of his head. And he walks a half a mile up the right-of-way, the railroad, and he waves to me. And he yells to me, he says, there's a train station up here. So we walk up the right-of-way to the train station. And there are 5 or 6 people seated around a table playing dominoes. They wave us over. Now, most of these people probably have not seen a Caucasian. If ever, they haven't seen one in 35 years, because believe me, we are in Nowheresville. They invite us to sit down. They are playing dominoes. They have some tea brewing, and having been sick with malaria and hepatitis, I'm real careful about what I eat. But I saw how hot and boiling it was. I figured I could fake a sip of it just to be social. So we sit down, and I ask them, does anybody know whether 20 kilometers down in that direction there is an old locomotive and railroad cars that had been blown off the track? Nobody knows anything about it. And I asked them another question about what's 20 kilometers in the other direction up the track. Nobody knows anything about it. I then asked them, I said, is there an airstrip north of here in a place called Tan Lin? And the one fellow says to me, no, there isn't an airstrip, and you can't go there because that's where the bad people are. The driver then taps me on the shoulder and says, you have to go to the bathroom. When somebody tells me I have to go to the bathroom, they don't have to tell me twice. So we go to the bathroom back of the train station. He says, you know who that guy is? And I said, yes, I figured it out. He was the local party boss, and it was time to leave, because we shouldn't have been there. And I didn't want to get the driver in trouble, let alone my son. So we head north up the road towards Tan Lin. There was an airstrip there. I knew it wouldn't be there because it was a steel airstrip. And yes, there are things called a steel airstrip, and like Legos, they're locking pieces of metal to form a runway. I knew it wouldn't be there. But I knew north of that were 2 places that I wanted to stop to say prayers for people who had been killed there. And we head up the road, we stop in a certain place, I get out of the car, say a prayer for a friend. Head another 5 miles up the road, stop, get out of the car to say a prayer for another fellow. And these were people who had died in March and April of 1970. So I said to the driver, go north now to a place called Vo Su. Now he has a very rudimentary map. He says there's no Vo Su on it. I said, remember the railroad that didn't exist? I said, let's go to Vo Su now because it exists. So we're driving up the road. And as we're driving up the road, I look off to the right, and I see about 300 feet off to the right, barbed wire. First string of barbed wire is about 8 feet high. This barbed wire Next row is about 12 feet high. Beyond that is about 16 feet high. And beyond the barbed wire are what you and I would think would be warehouses, tin sheet, metal sheet warehouses. And I said to the driver, "Is that where the bad people are?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Is that a re-education camp?" He said, "Yes." "Can I take a picture of it?" He said, with both feet on the accelerator. No. The bad people, the people in the re-education weren't the bad people. They were the people who resisted being told how to think in a certain way, how to act in a certain way, who questioned why their child had no future except what the government gave them. I've been to Vietnam back 3 times. The first time was 2005, and I saw the re-education camp on the right side of the road. I went back in 2008, this time with my wife. And as I tell her, we're driving up the road, and I said, "I'm just going to give you an elbow. And when I give you an elbow, you look out the right window, and you're going to see the triple layers of barbed wire and the shacks behind it." And as we get there, I look to the left, and there on the left, on the other side of the road, is being built what looks like a penitentiary. 20-foot high concrete walls with circular guard towers along the length of it, twice the size of the re-education camp across the road. I go back in January of 2012 once again because I want to stop, I want to say prayers along the way for my people, and I want to see what the re-education camp looks like. The re-education camp on the left is now 4 times the size of what it was in 2008. And where there was barbed wire and metal shacks is now concrete walls, guard shacks, etc. So here it is now. The Vietnam War, will say, ended in 1975, and you're talking 40 years later, and the people aren't buying the process. More and more and more of them are obviously resisting it. Another sign of resistance in Vietnam is you go to church. The churches are packed, absolutely packed, standing room only. You go to the main church in Saigon, which I like because it's called Notre Dame Cathedral. People are standing in the roadway because they can't fit inside the church. They're living under this horrible regime. It's going to take a long while before it collapses, as communism always collapses under its own weight. But the people are living under this. And the poor driver says to me, "Will my children," he has 2 daughters, "will my daughters ever live in a free society?" So that's a long answer to why I went back to Vietnam.
Just really quick, did your son serve?
He didn't. He didn't.
Was that his choice?
Yeah, his choice. The interesting thing is the family, the children of active duty soldiers, a lot of them go into the military. But the families of reserve component soldiers, a lot of them don't. And the reason is because the military took their parent away from them. Whereas if you're an active component soldier officer, you live on the military base. Your kids go to the military grammar school, the military high school. The military brought you together, keeps you together. In the reserves, it doesn't. The reserves took you away from your children, from your family. And there are not many children of reservists go into the military.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the time that we've got.
Thank you. My pleasure.